Thank you. My name is Jeremy Knox. I'm a lecturer in digital education at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm going to talk to you in the next 20 minutes or so about a project called the Learning Analytics Report Card, very deliberately chosen to spell the acronym LARC, kind of referring to playing with student data. And I should emphasize here that the title should probably be Students Playing with Student Data. So that's the key idea in this project, is we wanted to explore ways of students actually playing with their own data. Yes, you did hear that correctly. I work at the Centre for Research in Digital Education. There is a learning analytics strand in that centre, but I work in a centre in the strand for digital cultures, as well as being a shameless plug for my book, which I highly recommend. This slide also illustrates that I'm not a data scientist, so I don't really work in learning analytics. I work in educational theory, philosophy of technology, critical theory, areas like that. And given that we've all heard how interdisciplinary the learning analytics field is, you should be embracing me warmly, as well as recognizing how that this field can and does benefit usefully from theory. So I want to kind of divide up the next 20 minutes or so to talk a little bit about the background behind this project, some of the ideas about learning analytics, and then to talk about the software and the project itself. So you have to pay for seeing the software by listening to me talk about theory for a couple of minutes. Interested in this topic, I began to focus on what I perceived to be a bit of a gap and a bit of a distance between the production of learning analytics and the spaces in which it is suggested that we respond to it. And I think the keynote this morning picked up on this distinction quite interestingly, referring to it as a kind of spectrum of agency, probably in a much more nuanced way than I am. But in these terms, actionable intelligence, data-driven decision-making, and interventionist science, in practice, we tend to produce learning analytics with data scientists over here, and we require students and teachers to respond to that data science over here in a separate disciplinary space, in a separate kind of disciplinary understanding. So what I wanted to do is try and pick apart some of the issues at stake with that separation. And I should say here as well, I very much enjoyed the ethics panel yesterday, and I think they brought up, if anyone was there, brought up a lot of these issues as well. I want to talk about two themes that are related to this distance, and I elaborate on those in the paper that is on the slide there. And they are what I'm terming a kind of black boxing of analytics and an educational empowerment or disempowerment, and also a kind of mythologizing of objective data. So I'll explain those two terms, but the key thing I want to get across here is not only are these the ideas that inform the project I want to talk about, but I think there are also things that those acting and required to act on analytics data should be talking about. And by that I mean teachers and students. If we think education is encouraging students to be critical thinkers and users of their data, then I think they should be encouraged to talk about these kinds of subjects. So what do I mean by black boxing? Well, some of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with this term. I think best said by Bruno Latour, to focus only on the inputs and outputs of a system rather than its internal complexity. In other words, not lifting the hood and seeing how something works. And this is certainly a common approach to technology. But what I think that means when we look at the practice of data analytics in educational institutions and this distance between the production of data and its application, we find that teachers and students are faced with a hidden process. They don't have the skills or the expertise to understand the data that they're required to act upon, and as a result are only able to respond to what the data is telling them about the situation. I think that education is a space where teachers want to ask the how and the why questions. They are not just concerned with the what that data is reporting. They want to ask how analytics is involved in shifting education towards an intensification of assessment, the increasing entanglement of learning analytics with the managerialism of higher education, with the increasing neoliberalism of the sector, and all those ethics questions which were opened up very expertly in the panel yesterday. Continuing what I think is an educational interest in the how and the why of the production of data analytics. In the paper I also talk about a kind of mythology of objective data, and really what I'm referring to here is the difference in the disciplinary understandings of what data is producing. And I thought that was said quite well in, I think, the keynote this morning as well. I'm sure this audience needs no introduction to the difference between causation and correlation, and I'm sure many of you will agree that the argument isn't trying to find cause, it's trying to find a good correlation, and that correlation is good enough. However, it may be in education that finding a correlation isn't enough. We need to know context. When we are getting a signal of the progress of a student and we are required, perhaps ethically we are encouraged to act on that signal, it would perhaps be good for educators and students to know some of the context behind that, again related to the assessment and managerialism examples I gave previously. And of course the response to that, and I've been encouraged to hear quite a bit of talk about this at the conference, are ideas about deep data as well as big data. And that is very much to do with, I think, finding out the contexts behind the situations that produce, for example, at-risk students. So I know that a lot of us are aware of some of those issues around data analytics. So to recap, those are the ideas that informed this project, the Learning Analytics Report Card, and there are ideas that I also think educators and students should be having conversations about, not only in terms of the technical production of analytics, but the ethical dimensions of what it means to use this data in the educational situation. There's a website there with a bit more information about the project, and on this slide we have a couple of the questions that motivated it. How can we foster critical awareness, a data literacy amongst faculty, teaching faculty at university? And crucially, how can we involve students in this process? Just to say that a bit more plainly, what I think this project is about is getting students and staff to discuss analytics. And it's also about getting students to participate in the analytics process and how that might productively develop. What I'm about to show you is a very small pilot project, but I hope that the ideas embodied in it are ones that can be developed. I should also say here that getting students to talk about analytics and getting them to participate in it is neither of the two things that I sort of perceive this field and this conference to be interested in. That is the technical production of data science in education or its application in a pedagogical situation. This is neither of those things. So you decide whether this is learning analytics or not. But I would certainly want to argue that these kind of things are important parts for the field to develop with. This is what the Learning Analytics Report Card looks like. This is the interface. It's a piece of software that works alongside the Moodle learning management system. And at this point, I will come out of PowerPoint and just show you it working. Am I going to be able to do that? Here we go. Slightly large for the screen. Key, as I said, in this project was to try and allow students to have some sort of participation in the learning analytics process. Of course, it would be ridiculous to ask students to program their own analytics, but what we were interested in is students having some choice in the process. This interface allows students to choose a course that they want to look at. All these are titles of courses on a fully online postgraduate degree program at the University of Edinburgh. In saying that, I'm also signaling that the students that we were using this project with were students of digital education and students versed in some of these issues. It also allows students to choose a particular date for when they would like their report to be generated. And the idea was that students could go into the system at any time they wanted during their course of study. I'll choose this week, and I'll scroll down to show you the various different report themes that we created for the LARC. Necessarily ambiguous titles: attendance, engagement, social interaction, performance, and personal. What a student is allowed to do is, on a particular course and during a particular week, choose a report theme, a report that they would like to be generated about their activity that week. They might want to report on attendance and social interaction, for example. I'm just going to tick them all to show you it working. Clicking that button will generate a written report. And this, I realize now, is going to take a little bit longer than it normally does, because we've just added some sentiment analysis to it, which is using a bit of software that makes it very slow. But at this point, just imagine some nice elevator music in the background. And as the arrows turn, and I keep talking any second now, a wonderful paragraph, a couple of paragraphs of text will appear. The analytics behind this report are written report are very, very simple. I have chosen a number of report themes. The system has looked at my data within this particular course in Moodle, and it has used a number of hard-coded threshold values to pick some predetermined sentences that have been stored in the database and to place those sentences into some paragraphs for me to read. If I'm a student, I can go in and look at this report card at any point during my engagement with the course, and I can decide on the kind of themes that I want to choose. Following some student feedback, which I'll get onto in a moment, we decided to add a section showing a little bit more of the data that generates some of the sentences. That's quite an interesting perspective from students, but we probably need to do a bit of graphic design work on that. Key to the report card is this comments box, because the LARC was used within programs where we were encouraging students to actively reflect on the experience of getting analytics. This comment box allows them to decide whether not only if the analytics were accurate, but what they felt about an automated piece of feedback, all those sorts of issues. I should also say at this point that the report cards were visible only to the students that were generating them. However, they could choose to download them as a PDF and share them with others, and they were automatically archived. So at this point, I'll just pop back into PowerPoint. We've only worked with a small amount of the pilot data so far, but looking at the user data behind this system may be of interest, and the couple of graphs I'm going to show don't necessarily say anything about the students, but they are more illustrative of the kind of research one could do with user data from a system of this sort. This graph shows a number of weeks during a course, and the orange nodes are points at which reports were generated. Data was refreshed every week, so a report like this might be used to show at what point during a week students were interested in generating their own report about progress. This one shows the difference between, or the point at which students were accessing archived reports. So the horizontal line of blue nodes there shows students who were accessing reports about the week they were studying in, and the vertical line of orange nodes underneath each blue point shows at which archive reports that the student was looking at. So one might use an analysis like this to track how students are generating a report in a particular week, and then tracking back and comparing that report with previous weekly reports. And that sort of thing can be broken down in terms of the various report themes that the student was choosing. Aside from the user data, what I'm most interested in with this project, and I think, as I said at the beginning, is with generating student discussion. For me, that was the primary objective of this kind of project. It wasn't about developing learning analytics as a technical process, and it wasn't about applying that, particularly within a pedagogical situation. It was about getting students talking, and we have on the next few slides some examples of what I think were some really productive discussions that we had with students. This first slide shows some positive comments about the sense of autonomy around students generating their own data, some critical points about recognizing how data can only be partial and indicative, and the process of going through a regular kind of self-generation of reports as a consciousness raising process. More critical points here about confidence. This was something that we found in quite a few student comments that we thought was very interesting. The idea that one would need to build up a sense of confidence in an automated system to be able to trust the kinds of things that it was saying about their progress. Lots of interesting comments as well about the notions of surveillance that are built into. There's a sense that these are built into some of these systems. And a nice relation there to science fiction with HAL. Now, it'd probably be easy to dismiss a comment like that, but any cultural theorist would jump at that comment as highly indicative of a student's awareness of cultural resources around them, which they are using to make sense of what is a newish experience, as this student comments at the top of this slide. And this is the second 2 points here, another, I think, good examples of the kind of critical discussion that students were raising. Questioning how a system like this could track the wider activities that they were doing and that they felt were valuable activities within the courses in question. And the final one, I think, interesting in the sense that students were, through this system that they were generating themselves, a student-centered and a student-focused system, began thinking about how a teacher might view them in systems like this. That's about all from me. That's a couple of papers on the project. The first one from me, the second one from the developer, Amy Izzard. The second one has a lot more about the technical production of the software. And finally, I should acknowledge the wonderful people who helped out with the project. And the one who isn't mentioned is Anne-Marie Scott from Information Services, whose insight has been wonderful throughout. Thank you.
When you were showing us the demo, you said the categories are deliberately vague or opaque or something.
Yes.
Now, when I saw engagement, whenever I see engagement, I think, what the hell do you mean by engagement? Did the students come up with similar kind of things, or were they happy with this very generalised set of titles that you gave in the report?
No, they were actually, that was one of the first questions that they came back with, well, what does this stuff mean? But I probably should have said a bit more. We deliberately left them vague because we wanted students to go through a kind of reverse engineering experience. We wanted them to try and work out what engagement was by looking at the results of the reports.
But do you plan to reveal to them, to provide some way of digging in and saying, oh, what does this mean? Kind of the next level down in a way.
Well, I did that by sharing the second of these papers with them because that gives all the magic behind it. But within the courses that we were using this with, we definitely tried to leave things quite vague. But towards the end, once we generated some discussion, once we felt that they had explored some of the issues as much as we felt was useful, then we showed them the workings behind. Yes.
I found theoretical thoughtfulness really interesting and exciting. I do want to ask, though, that in the actual report itself, it seems like the report card is making inferences for the student. You are very engaged. You are, and giving sort of qualitative judgments as opposed to letting the student interpret the data to their own meaning. I'm curious if you could comment on that.
I think that was absolutely very deliberate. The idea with this project was to provoke discussion, and at no point were we making the claim that the analytics were truthful in any sense. You can go and look at the paper that describes how it works and judge that for yourself, and we encourage students to judge that for themselves. The idea with the sentences, and you may have seen some very provocative sentences, and there was a few that students particularly picked out, particularly in relation to comments we were making about their personality within the report card. That was very deliberate. We were trying to provoke discussion. We were trying to provoke them to try and work out what this system was doing. But what I would say there is we felt we were doing that in a safe space, a space in which we knew the students we were working with and we were protecting their data.
1, 2, 3, 4, and then there was the fifth there. So that's
So although you're not saying that your algorithms were sources of truth, right? Some of them, they were simple comparisons, right? They were comparisons. And I noticed that they were comparisons to self. So I'm wondering, comparisons to self, comparisons of that student relative to themselves the previous week. In the analysis, did you look at, so we've done large-scale analysis on just that and found student activity to vary wildly week to week. So I'm wondering, in the generation, did you do validation after the fact to look at what the content of the reports was and was it indeed sensible? Because I'm sure you want students to interpret this, but you don't want to give them stuff that's not useful, right? So did you look at that after the fact, and can you speak to the processes of thinking about those triggers and creating them? They're distinct from most.
Yeah, and also kind of to respond to the previous question, we did want this analytics sort of to do useful things. We weren't denying that they weren't random. We wanted them to do useful things as well. We're not there yet in terms of analysis. We've only really began to get out of the system a very small amount of data, but that's something we do want to do, is try and track back and maybe even look at ways of students being able to do that. So the kind of graphs that we were looking, I showed you earlier, is maybe something that we could do as a student-facing thing.
Students interpret them and
Yeah.
validate whether they were useful.
Yeah, so hopefully more in that space.
like one of the things I also as a researcher is struggling with this dashboards things. I mean, like there are numbers, right? It says your score is 5, out of, but what does it mean, What does those numbers mean? How the students can interpret those numbers? I mean, is it good to have 20, not 25 or 15, So I guess we might need more scaffolding, in addition to those numbers. And additionally, I'm wondering, like, how, in your research or for others' research, like how you deal with false positives, because models work with certain accuracies, and you bring, some information out of those model outputs. So how we are really dealing with false positives there? This also, I think, goes back to interventions as well. You say, oh, this student is feeling bored, but how much confident your model is to say that, and what's the impact of that, on the student? So maybe it's just generic comment, but these are some of the questions that I'm struggling with.
I think it's a great comment, and I think what we were trying to do with this system is generate some sense of data literacy, and I think that's precisely what you're talking about, is presenting students with a dashboard and with a series of numbers, although they might be produced with good intentions and be accurate by certain measures. There needs to be a sense of literacy amongst the students who are presenting that too, and that's the kind of thing I think we were trying to foster with this.
I think there was, it's your question.
So this ties into a question before about the one thing that jumped out was the one that said you're in the bottom third. I think it's sort of a reporting element, the type of
I think that's right, and I think that's one of the reasons why we wanted to use text rather than numbers, because we wanted to surface some of the ambiguity that is in text. That's something we wanted to be quite forefront in this. We wanted students to challenge the sentences that they were getting back, and that is some of the feedback we got. I don't think I managed to display any of that, but lots of the feedback we got was about, you could say this in a different way. I understand what it's saying, but you could say this in a different way. So, yet there's more data, a lot more data from the student discussion that has come out of this.
That was Kirsty.
I'm wondering, could you give us an example of, do students actually fight back against incorrect classifications, for example, right? So if they feel like they have been do they actually challenge that, or do they believe it? So this is one of the things that keeps coming up for us. Like I've shown them these dashboards which I say, look, they're probably wrong. No one can challenge them, but they believe it. Are you finding something?
I can't say I've looked at the latest set of data with this, but absolutely with the stuff we have looked at, there is very little in the way of challenging. Even some of the statements that we put in there that we thought might be quite provocative, there's been quite, and I should also say these are students that are on a postgraduate program in digital education. We are it's a program that's about trying to generate critical understanding of digital literacy, data literacy, and there isn't much pushback against the reports.